You know this story by now. It's been common in the past year. The pandemic ravaged economies worldwide. Small businesses went bankrupt in droves because of lockdowns. And I'm one of the unlucky ones that found themselves without a paycheck for next month's rent. There's not much to say about myself. I'm an average guy. Average height, weight, build. Average low-income job. Average shitty apartment. Average bills. Until the local fast food joint went under after a month without business. So, I did what everyone else did at that time. I started job hunting. Sending out CVs. Going from interview to interview. Losing my hope bit by bit with each phone call. I didn't have anything to stand out from the crowd. No skill that was in demand. I finished high school and figured I'd spend the rest of my life working minimum wage and playing video games. My salvation from eviction came out of the blue, in a form I never expected. As a last-ditch attempt, I signed up with a job agency, hoping they would succeed where I failed. I went through the usual procedure of signing contracts and they sent out my CV. Barely 3 days later, I got the much-awaited phone call. It's a pretty unusual gig, the agent told me. A guy named Seb, about my age and in no better position in life than mine. But it pays well. I'm game, I said without hesitation. With no savings, a quarter of a gas tank, and only loose change left of my last paycheck, I couldn't turn down anything. When's the interview? No interview, Seb told me. They want to talk to you over the phone. But from what they told me, it's pretty much an asterisk accept and you're hired asterisk deal. That's not at all suspicious. Hey man, it's up to you if you accept, Seb told me. It's a bit suspicious. But you said you're desperate, so I bumped you up the wait list. It probably pays under the table. But hey, he started. But I cut over him. It's better than going hungry. Exactly, Seb said. So stick with it. But call back. Worst case scenario, you'll only have to work there until I find you something else. I will, I assured him. And thanks. No problem, he answered. I'll give them your number. Expect a call in the next few days. With that, he hung up. I got busy around the apartment with chores, but didn't get 3 minutes deep before my phone rang again. I ran to answer it, having left it charging in the bedroom. Hello, I greeted as I put it to my ear. Good afternoon. Is this Mr. Mark? A delicate, feminine voice asked. That's me, I said, stifling a giggle at hearing Mr. and my name used together. Perfect, the woman said. My name is Anna, and I'm calling you on behalf of my employer. From what I understand, you are in search of a job? I am, I answered. Awesome, Anna said with enthusiasm. Not the corny HR type either, but genuine enthusiasm, like she was happy. So how's this going to work? This Anna, I asked. Do I come over for some aptitude test or something? No, Anna said with amusement. Nothing of that sort. Stay on the line and go to your front door, she instructed. Her request was more than a bit concerning, but I did what she asked of me. I got to my front door, which led to the floor's corridor, and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. So do I open it? I asked. Yes, Anna answered. There should be something on your doorstep. This whole situation felt faker by the moment. At this point, I was expecting it to be a prank from Sib or something. Maybe he actually worked for one of those prank shows and the job agency was just a facade. I opened the door, expecting a jump scare and a nearby camera to catch all of it. But no one was there. Instead, I saw an envelope on my doormat, placed neatly in its center. An envelope? I asked. Yep, and I answered. Take it inside and open it. I picked up the dirty yellow thing, pinching it between 2 fingers as I walked to my kitchen. I sat down at the small table and gingerly opened it, finding a blank piece of old-looking paper inside, along with an expensive-looking fountain pen. Do you read horror stories online, Mr. Mark? Anna asked. Creepypastas, short stories, found footage types. No, I'm not into reading, I answered. Never was, especially horror. Then you'll have to do a bit of research, I'm afraid, she said, and I could tell that a bit of wind was gone from her sails. Do you want me to write horror stories? I asked. I mean, I could, but I'm no Stephen King. No horror stories, Mr. Mark, Anna assured me. Your job will consist of writing sets of rules. Miss Anna, I'll be real with you for a moment, you lost me. I admitted, convinced I'd blown it anyway. Let me explain, Anna said quickly. It'll all make sense in a minute. Go ahead, I'm listening. Your job will consist in coming up with sets of rules, like I already said. You will be given a setting, usually an unsettling one, and you'll have to build said sets of rules around that setting. No story, no characters, no events, just the rules. Do you understand, Mr. Mark? Not really, I admit it. Read up some stories, then look for ones where people find rules at new jobs, or when moving to a new home or school. You're bound to find some. Read them, and use the pen and paper we have provided to write similar rules. When the list is done, place it back inside the envelope and leave it on your doorstep. You have until tomorrow at dusk. If the envelope isn't on your doorstep by then, we'll assume you're not interested. I'll give it a shot, I said after a few moments of thinking. It wasn't like I had anything better to do with my time. What's the setting? This first one is a test, Anna said, so make the setting whatever you want. We want to see if you offer what we're looking for. Try to make it as scary as possible, she said cheerily. I'll give it my best, I said, trying to fake the slightest amount of enthusiasm. That's the spirit, Mr. Mark, Anna said. We expect great things from you. I will return with another call after the list is appraised. We will discuss your salary then. We said our goodbyes and she hung up. I made a coffee despite the hour, brought my laptop into the kitchen, and started researching. A quick Google search revealed treasure troves of material. Many stories like Anna had described, and just as many communities centered around these stories. Communities like this one. I took to reading the most popular stories I found, which in all honesty was a total drag. I really don't like reading. Still, in a few hours I had a good understanding of what I was supposed to do. Some of the stories creeped me out. I'll admit, I'm not a horror enthusiast, but I'm not a scaredy cat either. Which is all to say that it takes a bit of effort to get under my skin. By midnight, I picked a setting and churned out the first set of rules. They weren't good or scary by any measure, so I went back on them and did them again, distilling that creepy feeling further. At the time, I thought that maybe I had a knack for writing, a hidden talent that I never picked up on up to that point. I could already see books with my name on them, earning me serious cash. But looking back on it, I realize it was just the newfound sense of purpose, after almost a month without one that spurred me on. Anyway, after multiple revisions, I was satisfied with the result. So, I wrote the rules on the paper and put it back inside the envelope. Seeing that it was nearing 4 a.m. and I'd been awake for almost 22 hours at that point, I went to sleep. I woke up at about 2 in the afternoon and decided to leave the envelope outside as Anna instructed, but to keep on the lookout and see who'd come for it. I was still convinced it was a prank show or something like that, but I figured I'd get some cash for my effort and for the right to broadcast it. So, I waited. I glued to the peephole. 5 minutes turned to 10, then to half an hour, but no one came. Of course no one would come, I thought. How would they even know if I don't call them? As I was ready to throw in the towel and call Sib, my phone rang. I recognized the number right away. Good afternoon, Mr. Mark, Anna greeted me. Hello, I said. The list is done. Will you send someone to pick it up? I asked. That's what I'm calling you for, Anna answered. The rules have been appraised. My superiors are very satisfied with your work. You are hired, Mr. Mark. How? When? I asked dumbfounded, opening the door and finding the envelope still there. You start tonight at 10 p.m., 9-hour shift including breaks. I will text you the address shortly, Anna said, ignoring my question. We hope to see you there, Mr. Mark. With that cheerful remark, she hung up. I tried to call back a few times, but it never went through. A chirpy robotic voice told me that the number was no longer in use. I received a text a few minutes later that contained an address, about half an hour away, but trying to call that number gave the same result. I was creeped out before, but this sealed the deal. I didn't know what they were playing at. I just knew I wanted no part in it anymore. So, I resolved to call Sib back, politely ask him what the fuck, and tell him to find me something else. But before I got to do any of that, I noticed something out of place. The envelope was placed neatly in the center of the doormat again. I picked it up cautiously, eyeing the empty corridor for any sign of movement. The envelope felt thicker between my fingers, but ever so slightly lighter than before. Opening it, I found $300 inside. in $20 bills. I know that might not sound like much, and it really isn't an exorbitant amount of money, but at that moment it was a lifesaver for me. So, despite my better judgment, I gave it a try after all. I already got $300 out of the deal that far, so it was definitely worth my time if nothing else. I went grocery shopping to restock the fridge, filled up the car, cooked and ate a proper dinner for the first time that month, and waited for night to come. I left home 40 minutes before my shift. The phone's GPS picked up the address right away, leading me out of the city and onto some battered country roads. I passed through a few small towns on the way, but barely saw any other cars on the road. The GPS led me off of asphalt and onto beaten dirt at some point, into some dark woods. Alarm bells went off in my head, telling me how bad of an idea this was, but I ignored them. The belief that this was just a prank grew stronger, pushing back against the mounting dread and paranoia. After 10 more minutes through the woods, I saw something between the trees. A 3-story building with a flat rooftop, lined with dark windows. The GPS pointed me straight at it, and as I approached, a tall concrete fence topped with barbed wire came into view. Some empty parking spaces greeted me as I entered the clearing, so I pulled into one. I was close enough to the gate to see that the chain around its handles dangled freely, leaving it unlocked. I got out of my car cautiously, leaving the engine running in case I needed to make a hasty retreat. "Guys, you can come out," I yelled into the silent night. "I know this is a prank. Ha ha, you got me good." No answer came, but I waited for a couple of minutes, hoping they'd give up. I was sure there were cameras in some bushes nearby, filming me, waiting for my reaction. Instead, as a handful of minutes turned to 10, nothing happened. I walked closer to the gate to try and see if anyone was inside, and the feeling of dread that was steadily building up inside of me shot up to 11. Next to the gate, mounted on the flat surface of the cement fence, was a metal plate. "This can't be real. It's impossible," I thought as I read the text on the plate. Sunny Hills Asylum was written on it, along with the address in a smaller font. The location I imagined for my set of rules. They probably got access to my search history, I thought. I probably saw that name somewhere in a story and I appropriated it, and they figured it out. I was half satisfied with my conclusion, but it didn't make my mounting panic go away. If this was some prank show, it was awfully elaborate. I didn't know how to proceed. I was torn between returning to my car to leave or going inside to see this through. Looking back to the forest for any signs of life, I noticed movement in the darkness. Something was there, but it was too fast to be human. It darted between the trees, hiding in their foliage, and I felt a bout of nausea when I caught sight of it again. That sealed it. I didn't want to stick around and risk getting mauled by some wild animal. I pulled out my phone as I power walked to the car, and saw the clock turn to 22 o'clock. The car produced a stutter, and I heard its engine die. What the hell? I thought with confusion. The car was a piece of crap, but it didn't have any problems I knew of besides being a bit old. I dashed to it and threw myself in the driver's seat, reaching for the keys to try and start the car. The engine rumbled, but it failed with a pathetic sputter. A flash of movement in the clearing got my attention as I was about to give it another try, but I lost sight of whatever it was. That was until it collided with the passenger side window, shattering it and raining bits of glass on me. "What the fuck?" I yelled, my panic in full swing. Nothing was there, but I knew it could be back any moment. With shaky fingers, I reached for the keys again and tried the ignition. Nothing. "Fuck," I yelled, slamming my hand on the steering wheel. My phone rang in my pocket, making me jump back in the seat. I pulled it out, dropped it between the seats, and tried to fish it out. Another impact shook the car, shattering the back window. My fingers snagged on the phone, and I pulled it out in a frenzy. "Help," I yelled into it the moment I answered the call. "Mr. Mark," Anna asked, in the same calm and sweet tone as always. "We were expecting you inside. Is everything all right?" "Fuck, I don't," I stuttered. "Something's attacking the car. I'm trapped." "Listen to me, Mr. Mark," Anna said, her voice a bit more urgent. "Keep calm. Get out of the car and run inside. They won't follow you." "How do you know?" I asked. "What if?" A loud bang stopped the words in my throat. Something collided with the windshield, sending a spiderweb of cracks rippling through it. I panicked harder, struggling to undo my seatbelt. "Trust me, and he yelled into my ear, "And run inside." I didn't need her to tell me a third time. The moment the seatbelt came undone, I shot out of the car. I landed on all fours and took off like that, getting to my feet after a few moments. Hasty footsteps echoed behind me, but I didn't turn around. If you make it until morning, I strongly suggest you never come back here. No amount of money is worth it. With my personal advice out of the way, let's get to the rules. Rule 1. Write your name and time of arrival in the log. Book at the front desk at the beginning of your shift. The guard checks the logbook at 22:05, on the dot before making his rounds, and he'll use deadly force on anyone not signed in. If you forget, you have to avoid the guard for the rest of the night. I wanted to yell out again, in frustration and anger aimed at my own stupidity. I'd already broken the first rule, and if the consequences would be what I imagined they'd be when I wrote the damn thing, I broke the most important rule of all. I put the list down and looked at the camera feeds in front of me. Each monitor displayed one of the hospital's many corridors or rooms, but I was searching for one in particular. The reception area came into view, and through the grainy feed I saw a thick book laying open on the desk. The guard already checked it, but I couldn't see him anywhere. That was bad news. Horrible even. You see, I didn't imagine the guard as a normal, elderly man dutifully doing his rounds with a lantern and radio in hand, or even as a human for that matter. No, the best way to address the guard wasn't him, but it was a tall, wide figure, striding down the corridors at night in search of anything out of place. It was a faceless entity, incapable of feeling emotions like empathy or mercy, and it was strong, maybe insanely so, unwavering in its pursuit of ridding the property of unwanted guests. I envisioned the guard as an unlikely ally, something that could brave any adversity one might face during their shift, so long as one followed the rules. Otherwise, the guard was your worst enemy. Scanning the other monitors, I noticed a thick metal door shaking wildly in its hinges. The monitors didn't have any sound, but even so, I heard the metals rattles all the way up on the third floor. I watched with bated breath as the lock broke and the door swung open, revealing the thick darkness inside. Something walked out of that darkness slowly, its eyes lifting to peer into the camera. I felt its gaze land on me through the monitor, freezing me still in my seat. The creature walked away slowly, and I couldn't look away from its mangled form. It was big and bulky, with swollen muscles covered in protruding veins. I don't doubt that any bodybuilder would be envious of its physique, save for the creature's deformities. One of its legs bent backward at the knee, the source of its slowness as it had to drag it along the floor. Its arms were different lengths, with its right being the longer of the two. It was completely hairless, and had a horrified expression permanently frozen on its face. Simply looking at it kept me paralyzed with fear. After it walked outside of the camera's view, I broke free from the spell. I brought up the paper and kept reading, although I already knew what I'd find. Rule 2. Make your way to the monitoring room right away. You can take whatever route you want, but you have to pass by solitary confinement and say hi to Greg. If you fail to do this, Greg will break out, and we don't want that. In case you forget, you have to call the nurses to sedate him and bring him back to his cell. I'd imagine the Sunny Hills Asylum is filled to the brim with patients, but they were all normal people. All, save for Greg, who was a bit more special, born to a possessed mother that was part of a cult. Greg inherited her strength and wild demeanor, but the cult hadn't been kind to him as he grew up, putting him through rituals meant to bring out his latent powers. That resulted in a myriad of physical and mental conditions. And when the cultists finally got what they wanted, awakening Greg's potential, he slaughtered all of them. He was found by authorities a few months later, roaming the countryside, and they took him in. But he proved to be too strong for them, so they transferred him here to live the rest of his days in confinement. I of course know all of that because I made it up myself. Greg wasn't a real, flesh and blood person, or at the very least he was never supposed to be. But the part that broke my heart, I imagined him as needing that tiny bit of reassurance, that fleeting sense that someone in this world cared about him, to keep him sort of sane and docile. It's why I wrote that rule the way I did, and breaking that rule also broke my spirit. Poor Greg didn't deserve this, none of it. The only silver lining was that Greg wouldn't come looking for me specifically. He'd aimlessly wander the building until he was caught. I was tempted to go out and look for him myself, to right my wrong in the slightest, but I knew that was a bad idea. I searched the drawers for a radio and pulled it out when I found it. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" I asked, pressing the button and holding it close to my mouth. "Greg broke containment. We need a team of nurses on it ASAP." "Copied," a feminine voice answered. "Stay where you are. A nurse will be dispatched to recontain Greg." Only silence followed after that statement, but I breathed a sigh of relief. With that task taken care of, I resumed reading, both to refresh my memory and to hopefully find some explanation for this madness. Rule 3. Once inside the monitoring room, check the camera feeds once every 30 minutes and report anything out of the ordinary to the guard. Besides the guard and nurses, anything in the corridors at night is considered out of the ordinary. Good, I thought. I'm already doing that. Well, I was doing half of that, to be precise. The monitoring half. I wasn't sure about calling the guard since I didn't log in like I was supposed to, but I decided I'd burn that bridge when I'd get to it. Rule 4. If the guard comes to check up on you, don't look at him. Only answer his first question, no matter what it is. And don't engage in further talking. He'll try to get you to talk more, but will leave after 10 minutes. I was sure I could ignore this one for tonight. If the guard would come for me, it wouldn't be to ask me questions. As for the questions themselves, I didn't have any specific ones in mind when I wrote this one. I thought of the guard asking random but deeply personal questions, meant to disturb and provoke you. What did it do if you didn't answer its first question? Or if you answered more than one? I don't know. I didn't imagine that far, and that had me scared. At least with the other rules, I had a rough idea of what would happen if I broke them. I put the paper down and switched to watching the monitors to see Greg's containment attempt. Checking the clock on the wall, I saw that half an hour had passed, but the night was still young. I found the guard patrolling the corridors randomly, but I didn't know enough about the layout of the building and the cameras to know where he was. I realized that was bad news. Without that knowledge, I couldn't be sure when the guard was nearing me. Another bridge to burn later. Soon after, I found the nurse that was sent out as well. She was I'm kinda ashamed to admit this, but it's how I imagined it. I never expected all of this to become real. Okay, she was a petite woman with curves in all the right places, and a skimpy, revealing nurse outfit that would have been more at home in an adult movie than a hospital. The only thing that stood out was her face, pale as a ghost and with dark lips and eyes, as well as random stitches running over her features. I'm very basic when it comes to horror. Okay, I know it. I'm not an aficionado, and I won't pretend I am. In any case, all of the nurses looked like that, with few differences between them. No names, no numbers, no way to tell them apart from one another. They're a hive mind with a singular purpose, contain anyone that's not the guard. But they're pretty dim-witted, easy to outsmart. So, I didn't worry much about them. Anyway, this particular nurse was a big help, and not just because she'd recontain Greg. She walked past the elevator on her way, and I saw the two plastered above the doors. I knew her location, so I could use her to map out the building. I followed her from one monitor to the next, drawing a mental map of wherever she went, and slowly I figured out where each camera in the building was in relation to each other. That ate away at a good portion of the night, about 2 hours or so. She seemed in no hurry to find Greg, or maybe I should have given her more details when I called earlier. I also fulfilled my other tasks, keeping an eye on all of the monitors for anomalies, and following Greg and the guard as well. My attention was stretched every which way in my attempt to keep track of everything that could kill me. So, I didn't notice when one of the monitors turned to static. Not until that static started spreading past the screen, engulfing the plastic that encased it. By the time I saw it, it had already reached the monitors around it. I panicked, picking up the paper to see the rules again. Rule 5. If you see a static anomaly on the monitors, call the IT department and leave the room immediately. Walk through the building for exactly 15 minutes. The anomaly should be fixed. That was bad news. I knew what the static would do. It would spread across the room and engulf everything. If it touched me, well, it wouldn't be good for my health. And it wouldn't stop at the monitoring room. It would spread outside indefinitely until the IT department stopped it. I jumped out of the chair and grabbed the radio, making my way to the door. I stopped with my other hand on the handle, deciding to call from in here. Even with the static slowly spreading behind me, I knew this room was still safer than the corridors. "Hello," I asked after fumbling with the radio. "I need the IT department. It's an emergency." I cried out into the radio a few more times until someone answered. A sleepy voice broke through the static, sounding very irritated at being disturbed so late into the night. "Sup? What's the problem?" the voice asked, a young man by the sound of it. One of the monitors went full of static. I stammered, and now it's spreading across the room. Yes, the IT guy said, sounding thoroughly bored. "You know the protocol for this situation. Leave the room for 15 minutes until you take care of it, right?" I asked. "Yep," he answered. "I'll be right over, and I better not find you there. I can fix the monitors, but I can't fix people." "Got it," I said. I shot the monitors one final look, finding that half of them were gone. I could still see the guard patrolling the ground floor, but I couldn't spot the nurse or Greg anywhere on the remaining monitors. Fuck. I left the room quietly, to not give away my position to anyone. The corridor was empty, but I couldn't stay put. The rule wasn't clear on if I had to be on the move for the 15 minutes. So, I decided to risk it. I wanted to find a closet somewhere and hide. Now, from what I imagined of the place, there were closets spread through all floors but the third. This floor had the monitoring room, the break room for the nurses, and some other various rooms, but no storage closets. I walked cautiously to the stairs, and went down them one step at a time, eyes and ears peeled for any sign of movement. The building was almost pitch dark at night. I was sure that the cameras had some night vision enhancements to allow me to see clearly, but out here, I was nearly blind. My eyes adapted after a while, but just barely. I reached the second floor and found lots of doors lining it, but I didn't know which one was the storage closet I so desperately wanted to crawl into. Most of them were rooms for the patients, but those were locked, while the closets weren't. So I tried the doors one by one. I was halfway down the corridor, with no luck. All of the doors were closed, as I abandoned door 6 and went for door 7, praying it would be the one. I saw a shadow coming from behind the corner at the corridor's end. A small shadow, walking around with a spring in her steps, like she was skipping merrily through a meadow and not this hellhole. I couldn't make out her features through the dark, but I knew it was one of the nurses, and I knew she saw me, seeing as my skin crawled and my hair stood up. "Hey," she yelled in a cheery, high-pitched voice. "You're not supposed to be out here. Let me escort you back to your room." Fight or flight kicked in hard. My heart went from idly beating along to drumming at a mile a minute. I turned and sprinted with all I had, not caring where I'd end up so long as it was away from her. "Hey, stop," she yelled after me. Her footsteps sounded from behind, mixing in with mine as she gave chase. "Don't run through the corridors. You'll hurt yourself. Leave me alone," I yelled as I reached the stairs and jumped down 3 to 4 at a time. "I'm not a patient, but you can be," she said. I looked back, and saw she reached the stairs as well. She was like a cheetah on steroids. Compared to her, I was a slug on sleeping pills. She bounded down the stairs with reckless abandon, closing the gap between us with terrifying speeds. I reached the landing and decided fuck it. Either I'd break my legs and she'd get me, or she'd catch up to me regardless. At least this way I have a chance, I told myself, and jumped over the next flight in a single go. I landed with a thud and rolled as the force of the fall pushed me to my knees. Luckily, both my legs survived, so I took off running. On the next flight of stairs I did the same, really pushing my luck. I crashed onto the landing, face first against the wall, but I didn't have enough time to assess my wounds. The nurse landed right next to me, so I took off. She tackled me from behind as I was about to jump over the last flight of stairs. Her strength was phenomenal. It was enough to send both of us flying through the air as she latched onto me. I turned around at the last moment, and ended up landing on top of her. She broke my fall, but I got winded. Now, she said in a sweet voice as she pushed me off. I rolled away and got on my haunches, heaving and wheezing as I uselessly gasped for air. "You went and hurt yourself, see? I told you not to run through the corridors." Between the tears and the fear, I looked up at her. She got to her feet, perfectly fine despite the fall, and pulled a syringe out from somewhere. I don't know from where, and I don't want to think about it. but let's just say that her skimpy outfit had no pockets to speak of. "Here," she said, pointing the needle at me. I fell on my back and crawled away on my elbows, but I knew there was no escaping her. "This will calm you down, and then we'll find you a nice, quiet room." "Phew," I tried to say, but with no air in my lungs, my voice failed me. She stepped on my foot to stop me, and leaned over me. Her free hand shot out and grabbed mine, with such force that I feared she'd break my wrist. She held my arm steady and aimed the syringe at my skin, but try as hard as I might, I couldn't break free. The needle touched my skin and was ready to break through into my veins, but an animalistic scream stopped her. We both looked down the corridor at its source, and found Greg barging towards us. Before any of us got to react, he punched the nurse away. She flew into a wall, hitting it hard enough to leave a dent. "Fuck," I thought. Greg was even stronger than I thought. He reached down to grab me, and got a hold of my leg. I was effortlessly picked up, and he lifted me high enough to make eye contact. Hanging upside down like I did, with my lungs still burning for air, I nearly shat my pants with fear. "Hey by big guy," I stammered. Greg paused, his brows creased, but it wasn't enough to wipe the permanently terrified expression on his face. He tilted his head and stared at me, like a wild animal curious about its prey. "You FRN?" he asked. His voice was deep and hoarse, breaking around the edges, but I felt warmth behind it. "Yes," I struggled to push out an answer. "I'm a friend. Don't hurt me, okay?" Greg was puzzled by my answer. He processed it ever so slowly, but made no attempt to put me down. I was afraid he couldn't understand me, that he'd snap and, in response, snap me as well. But his lips curled into a smile. "Friend," he yelled with glee. "Greg have friend." He flailed his arms happily, waving me through the air every which way. "Yeah, big guy," I answered, feeling the nausea building up. "I'm a friend. Put me down slowly, okay? Don't hurt your friend. Greg have friend, Greg have friend," he chanted, and lowered me to the floor a bit too fast. I fell on my head, feeling my neck twist and my shoulders contort, but I wasn't seriously hurt. Greg let go of my foot and I got up, wobbly from various aches and riddled with fatigue. "What name, friend?" Greg asked with excitement. It took me a moment to realize what he meant, as he slurred his words pretty badly. "Mark?" I answered when I finally deciphered it. "Mac," Greg yelled back, slurring my name as well. "Friend Mac." "Close enough, big guy," I said, with a dumb smile on my face to match his. I know I should have been way more scared than I was, but I just couldn't be, despite the way he looked. Greg was a genuinely sweet person that life had treated unfairly. Sure, he could snap me like a twig, but at that moment I was 100% sure he wouldn't. "Let play," Greg started, but was interrupted. The nurse tackled me out of the blue, sending me off my feet. Now, I've played football in high school. I got tackled by guys bigger than me plenty of times. But let me tell you, none of those could compare. I seriously doubt that a professional player could tackle me that hard. I landed on my side some 10 feet away and skidded to a stop on the rough floor. With carpet burns added to the list of injuries I'd sustained that far, I looked up. The nurse was face to face with Greg. "No hurt, friend," he yelled at her, loud enough to push her hair backward. But she wasn't fazed at all. She waited for him to finish, and brought up the syringe she wanted to use on me earlier. For her own sake, I thought, that thing better be elephant tranquilizers. Greg tried to punch her again, but she ducked below his long arm with surprising speed and grace. She reached up and grabbed Greg's wrist, trying to keep him steady. Greg swung his arm upwards and swatted her against the ceiling. She lost her grip on him and fell to the floor, bringing plaster and concrete raining down alongside her. How strong are these freaks? I wondered. And how resilient. If Greg had done that to anyone else, like me for example, I'm pretty sure it would have been an insta-kill. But the nurse got up like nothing happened and jumped him. The two fought through the corridor, struggling against each other, but there was no clear winner. They seemed evenly matched. Realizing that they were so busy with their scrap that they forgot about me, I decided it was time for me to make my exit. I got on all fours, but their mad brawl reached me. I took off frantically, avoiding blind kicks and punches and smashes that were strong enough to turn my bones to paste. The nurse flew into the wall next to me as I reached a corner, and looked at me as she crashed to the floor. I felt my skin tighten a size or two when she reached for me. But Greg's arm came at her from behind me and grabbed her again. Looking back at them wrestling like two mythical beasts, I took the corner and ran away blindly. I don't think I got 10 steps away before I collided with something and got sent on my ass. I slowly turned my head to look ahead, and my horrified gaze landed on the slender figure of the guard. "What's up with this commotion?" he asked, despite lacking a mouth. His voice emanated from the space around him, a low and ominous baritone that rattled my guts. "Who are you? What's your name?" I didn't answer. I got up and ran back towards Greg and the nurse. "Halt!" The guard yelled after me and gave chase. At least he wasn't as fast as the nurse, but he was still on my heels. Greg's and the nurse's fight moved, reaching the reception area, and we found him smashing her against the thick reception desk. With each slam, the wood splintered and groaned until it gave way. "Identify yourself," the guard repeated from behind me. I decided to fuck it, all of it. I ran towards the exit, towards the outside world filled with less madness than this place. I'd start my car, drive away, and never look back. But the guard grabbed the collar of my shirt and stopped me, only steps away from the door. He pulled me back with a swift motion that cut my breath short, muttering "damn hooligan" under his breath. "Mac!" Greg yelled, as the guard spun me, ready to throw me down on my belly. I caught a glimpse of Greg. He had syringes sticking out of him at various points on his body, all with their plungers down. His moves were slower, stuttery, and his eyes were half closed. He ran towards me and the guard, his steps wobbly, and punched it away, like the nurse had done plenty times tonight. The guard flew face first into a wall. "Go!" Greg yelled and grabbed one of my legs. "Friend, be safe." With that, he threw me at a window. One crashed through it, landing outside on a carpet of grass and shards of glass. Part 2 will be coming tomorrow. Wow, guys, that one still gives me chills. If you made it to the end, let me know you survived. Don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed the terror, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're creeping closer to that 1K goal, and your support means everything. Hit the bell so you never miss a nightmare-fueled upload. Stay spooky, stay safe, and remember, you might want to sleep with the lights on tonight. Until next time, peace out, if you can.